Good evening, viewers, and welcome to this special edition of On the Spot, where we're looking at the key issues arising out of the 2017-2018 financial year budget, which was read this evening by the Finance Minister. And today, we're looking at, what this budget entails, what it means to you, everyone out there in your different capacities and the sectors where you sit. Now, with me in the studios, I have Onegi Obel. He's an investment banker. Geoffrey, you're most welcome.
Thank you.
Very good. Then I also have the State Minister, Finance, David Bahati. Honorable David Bahati, you're most welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And an anti-corruption activist, Cissy Kagaba. Cissy, you're most welcome.
Thank you very much, and good evening to the listeners.
Then last but not least, we have Honorable Dr. Ezra Suruma, former Finance Minister. Also a long profile there. Dr. Suruma, you're most welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good evening.
Very good. Now, viewers, just to give you a digest of what happened in this year's or the coming financial year budget, it was a 29 trillion shillings budget, and of course the key winners in this budget, from what we've seen coming, what came out of the speech read by the Finance Minister this evening. Of course, we're seeing Transport and Works receiving a lion's share of the budget. That's about 4 trillion shillings. Then we have education also coming in there quite strongly. But then just to look at areas where taxes have been waived and others where taxes have been introduced. Of course, in terms of winners, you will say that circles are winners because we've seen a waive of tax on that one. Then with furnitures, or people that are dealing in furniture. Then agriculture, of course, whichever way you look at it, some would say it has been supported. Others would say that, the fact that it's under 1 trillion shillings and it employs majority of Ugandans, well, it was a clean shave for some people. But I'll move very quickly to Cissy. Who are your losers in this year's budget?
When you're looking at losers, we need to first look at the accountability sector. If you look at the justice land order sector, we need to find out how much money has actually been allocated to this sector. Because in the fight against corruption, I think it's going to be very important that you fund a particular sector that is so much engaged in issues relating to corruption. Of course, there's some monies that have been allocated, but I think for me that may not really be adequate enough. And again, if you're looking at agriculture, like you rightly said, it employs a big percentage of Ugandans. If you look at the percentage of the monies that have been put there vis-a-vis the monies that have been allocated to other sectors, I think we could have done actually better than that. Then, of course, the winners, as usual, we have the infrastructure, which I think actually, when you invest in infrastructure, it's very, very good. Infrastructure can actually spur growth and development. I think for me, the challenge that we see as a country has always been the high levels of graft within the infrastructure setting. Because if you put up roads, I think for me, this is something that can happen. But the issue is if the money that you put there and we don't see value for money, if you look at the amount of money that you have on accounts whereby the loans are lying idle, despite the fact that people knew about some of these things. So you realize that much as you're injecting a lot of money in infrastructure, we may not see actually the deliverables out of it. So, and again, like we said, you realize that the sectors where we see government putting money are more or less the same sectors where government has continuously put money. But the challenge and the issue is you never find a government or a country that has sufficient resources. But how effectively do we even use the little resources that we have? That for me is where the challenge is. The budget, when you look at the paper, it's actually good. Some of the things that the minister says that they're going to do, fighting corruption ruthlessly. And you ask yourself, what do you mean by ruthlessly fighting corruption? It's a vice that has actually been there. And again, when you analyze the speech, there's been a lot of rhetoric that we continuously see coming out. The policies are good, but the challenge, I think, for me has always been how effective do we implement the very good policies that we try to put in place.
Very good. Honorable Suruma, moving on. The theme for this year's budget is, or next financial budget is industrialization for job creation and shared prosperity. Now, from the language, the tone of the budget as delivered by the Finance Minister, did you see that coming out prominently?
That's a very difficult question, and of course raises the issue of whether what actually transpires in the budget eventually has anything to do with the theme. I saw somebody doing an analysis and doesn't seem there is much correlation between what the theme of the budget is and what actually happens. But it's nice to have a theme anyway. The theme serves as some kind of guiding light about the priorities of government. And I think that priority here, which seems to be recurring, is the importance of job creation. And I think the President has spoken at length on it, both today and on Tuesday. It's clear that we have a growing number of young people that need to be absorbed in employment. And so the question is, how do we do this? Industrialization is certainly one way. And so I think it's appropriate to see how we can increase industrialization. Shared prosperity, of course, is good politics. We would like to have an economy in which everyone is included. And I think an earlier title had been inclusive economy or something like this. We always want to have everyone included, sharing in the prosperity of the country. So when you can come down to the budget itself, to what extent does it actually address industrialization and so on? You have to have a theory of government, what it is that government is supposed to do, and whether it's doing it well or not. In reality, government is supposed first and foremost to provide public goods, such as law and order, such as peace, which the President has been hinting at correctly. And infrastructure also is a public good. Then the provision of public goods makes it possible for the private sector, which is 80% of the economy, to do its work well, including creating employment. So it's important that we realize industrialization and so on. This is really the work of the private sector. The government has long been out of actually producing goods and services, but it needs to create an environment in which industrialization can occur and other sectors of the economy can thrive, and then create the jobs and share the prosperity.
Very good. I'll move on to Honorable Bahati. And I'm sure probably there are some pointers that Honorable Suruma there raises, which probably might need a response from you at a certain point. But I want to add something. Looking at the allocation to agriculture, because agriculture at around 800 billion, 823, it's about 4% of the budget. And again, touching the theme, which has that word job creation coming out prominently, and understanding that majority of Ugandans actually sit within that sector. And by majority, I mean the youth, because they're the bulk of the population. Are you comfortable with the allocation to that sector that employs most Ugandans?
Yes, I'm comfortable because the way we look at agriculture and its allocation is that agriculture is part and parcel of the production system of a country, and it cannot be taken as an island on its own. I know some people have been talking about the Maputo Declaration, which talks about 12%. We don't really believe in that, because these declarations, international declarations, the commitments, we try to add them. There's Abuja for health, there's this one for this. The allocation went beyond what we have, 100%. So the way we look at agriculture is that if you build infrastructure, you are facilitating agriculture. Agriculture needs water. For example, we have allocated more than 140 billion for irrigation. If you have to have productivity in agriculture, you need fertilizers, you need irrigation. So the money that we are put in water is also counted for agriculture. Roads is part of agriculture. Electricity, if you are talking about value addition and we're extending electricity, is also part of agriculture. So this allocation of 4%, if you look at the allocation in terms of percentage, it can be misleading. But the actual allocation should be seen and evaluated by what actually do you want to do in agriculture. Do you want to do irrigation? Do you want that when these things are produced will be transported, and therefore investing in infrastructure, reducing the cost of transportation for these goods? Are you looking at water? Are you looking at electricity? Even health itself contributes to agriculture, because productive people have got to be healthy. So agriculture is looked at for us from our side. We look at it as an integral part of the whole system, and not just an island on its own. Okay. And if you aggregate this actual agriculture, we have put a lot of money contributing to agriculture. Even the youth fund that we have allocated and the women's fund, all these people are engaged in agriculture. The reduction of taxes on circles is part of agriculture. So this is the way we look at it.
Well, Cissy seems to want to jump in on that, but we'll get back to you, Cissy. I want to move to Geoffrey very fast. Geoffrey, you're an investment banker. And I know for the fact that one of the challenges that most Ugandan business people are contending with today is access to affordable credit or financing. We're talking about agriculture, and we know for the fact that most banks in Uganda are a bit risk averse when you mention agriculture. From the budget speech today, are you comfortable with what has been spoken about development finance, talking about Uganda Development Bank allocation and the like?
Not quite. It's an effort to capitalize the Uganda Development Bank. It's a good effort, but obviously it's not enough. What can be done is what we normally look at is the key price in the economy, the interest rate regime. The interest rate regime underpins every economic activity. Now, to the extent that this budget has not addressed that key price signal in the economy, there's much left to be done. I want also to address the theme, which was about industrialization and jobs
and shared prosperity.
Yes, there's a direct correlation between jobs and the key price in the economy. We can actually create jobs, but when we look at this budget, where is the jobs signal? The signal for jobs. We don't see it. Let's take it this way. In order to create jobs in this economy, we need to grow by a minimum of 8 percentage points of GDP. Year on year for 2 cycles of 5 years. That's the job creation threshold. Now this budget needs to be a function of that. We need to make each budget of each year a function of that year on year target of 8 percentage GDP points. Below that, we achieve what we call jobless growth. And it works this way. Professor knows it.
I do?
Yes, you do. When you grow by, say, less than 5%.
We are under 4% now?
You're under 4%. And then you extrapolate the population growth rate on that. You just do the math. You find that you're actually standing still. So that's why we say you need to grow by 8 percentage points of GDP.
So how do we attain that? What should we look at?
You look at policy. You can be a rock with no natural resources, but with the correct policy signals, you can attain this. We're endowed. We are really well endowed. We can achieve this goal. This budget comes from, there's a history to this type of budget. Professor is more familiar with it. This budget comes from the sub-programs. It's a stabilization budget.
Structure adjustment program?
Yes, it is a stabilization. The framework is stabilization, whereby they succeeded actually to stabilize the economy. But when you want to move to the next stage of growth with jobs, not just growth with jobs, you need to engage the second gear. Move from stabilization to growth with jobs. Now, that is what we have been having difficulty with. to engage the second gear. Can you imagine driving a car in the first gear on a long journey without changing?
So what you're saying, Geoffrey, is that you've not changed the gears since we embraced the SAP, Structure Adjustment Programs?
No, the leadership, the president has been telling us he wants jobs. But then, when it comes to designing the policy, by the way, these are programs. This budget represents a bundle of government programs. From our point of view, in our industry, they do not amount to policy signals. Yeah? Policy signals are medium to long term. These ones address, this budget addresses this fiscal year. This fiscal year. The relation between this budget and, for example, NDP2 is very thin. It is very, very thin.
Thank you, Geoffrey. Honorable Suruma, I want to move to you. I mean, Geoffrey has been referring to you a lot, in trying to understand this and put it in context for our viewers to really understand some of these things. Because he's saying that from where he sits, we've not moved into that space, of really making
jobs with growth.
Exactly. Jobs happen, or growing the jobs and that kind of thing. What is lacking, in your view? What can be done as well?
Yeah, Geoffrey has more advanced economics than I have, I think. I'll try to simplify, hopefully, for everyone. I agree with him that in order for jobs to be created, we have to have more investment, which means we need to have more machines that people can work with in order to produce goods and services. We need to produce more capital. And this means availability of credit. It means investment coming in from outside, what the President was talking about, FDI, foreign direct investment. So it's definitely important to look at the rate of investment, how much investment is being done. The infrastructure is investment. There's no doubt about it. And it creates a certain amount of employment, no doubt about it. Even though we would like to see more local content, more of our own companies participating in the investment work, but it is a very important aspect of the economy, which is the role of government. I have to come back to this. We have to know what things government should do, and then the things which should be done by the private sector.
Yes.
So government is doing what it's supposed to do. It's investing in improving infrastructure. It is investing in security, make sure that there is an environment of peace in our country, because without it, we can't have any economic activity. In law and order, some issues were raised about law and order, and it's very important that there is confidence in law and order, and making sure the contracts are honored, and people can invest and lend and so on, and they're sure they can get their money back, go to courts and get justice and so on. So this is extremely important. Now, what he's saying is that can the government do more to achieve structural transformation, not just stabilization, keeping inflation low and so on, and exchange rate stable? The government should go further. The government should cause a structural change, and that's why the government is talking about industrialization. Industrialization, as industry grows and the structure of the economy changes in terms of composition of GDP, how much income do we get from industry, how much do we get from agriculture, how much do we get from services. This is structural transformation. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, services have been growing fast. I think more than 50% of GDP is now services. Agriculture has come down, which is good, which is what we always wanted as a share of GDP. But industry perhaps would like it to grow even faster. Of course, in the last few years, industry seems to have slowed down in growth. But we want to see more of this coming, and I think it's an issue of capital. And I think that I look forward to the time when oil will begin to flow, so that capital that we have never had. We've always looked to the outside world for the capital. Then once the oil starts to flow, if we use the money wisely, perhaps we can break out of this impasse of insufficient industrial capital.
Very good, Honorable Ezra.
I hope I have simplified enough.
Yeah, you have.
You have tried.
But on the services bit, Honorable, and I think we can wrap up with this as we go for the break. There are those with the assertion that the services sector is dominated by foreign players. You barely have many locals playing in that space, especially telecom companies, people in banking and the like. But you help us, put more context to that. When we come back from this break, we'll also touch the issue of the 29 trillion shilling budget, the biggest budget ever in Uganda's history. What we'll be looking at when we come back from this break as well is where are these resources coming from? Looking at the sources domestically and globally, where government is looking to source for the money. Welcome back to the show. This is On The Spot, and I'm your host, Charles Woji, standing in for Patrick Kamara. We're looking at the 2017-2018 financial budget. Of course, it's themed industrialization for job creation and shared prosperity. Once again, I have Geoffrey Onegi, an investment banker. I have Honorable David Bahati, State Minister of Finance. I have Cissy Kagaba, an anti-corruption activist, and Dr. Ezra Suruma, former Finance Minister, and a long portfolio. You're most welcome once again, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen on the show. Now, Honorable Bahati,
yes,
the issue of resource mobilization, 29 trillion is a huge, huge amount by Ugandan standards, because it's our biggest budget. Where are we looking at? If you can help our viewers know where this money is going to come from, for starters.
Yeah, 75% of the resources are going to come from our own domestic revenue mobilization. That is taxes and non-tax revenue. Then the rest of it is we are going to borrow from external sources, and also we will be borrowing 954 billion from domestic markets. So this is how we are going to finance it. We're going to raise revenue from Uganda Revenue Authority, around 14.9 trillion, and non-tax revenue. These are levies levied by different government departments, and then we will be going to the markets externally and internally. Then also we are, because of the oil revenue, we will be drawing from our petroleum fund 125 billion to kickstart the process of construction of the 10 roads, 3 bridges, and international airport. So that, combined with the resources that we are going to borrow, will just facilitate the development of that infrastructure to be able to facilitate the production of oil by 2020. So it's going to be a very exciting, building on what Dr. Suruma said. We are looking forward in 3 years, 4 years to have our own base, a new base of resource from the oil, which will actually help a lot of these things. Very good. Geoff talked about UDB. Yes, it is true, the funds that we are investing in UDB are not to the level that we would want. For example, this financial, the minister said, we put in 26 million US dollars, which is around 93 billion. Next financial year, we're putting in 50, beginning with July, 50 billion. And then the following year, we'll be putting 250 billion to bring it to cross 500 billion. Yeah, so we have got to start somewhere, and we hope that this will help, not necessarily huge people who want to invest in huge factories, but at least value addition, because that's our target. And talking about the growth, where are you going to get this growth from? We want to target the area that has the maximum number of people that are employed there, which is agriculture. And the only way you can transform that is through value addition, having, the minister made a point in the speech very well, organizing it from seed production through value chain up to post-harvest. And that's what the way we are looking at it.
Mm.
So if we combine this with direct foreign investments, those factories, we will see growth coming to go up. Of course, with population growth rate, we cannot now stop it. It's already with us. The only thing valuable we can do is change on other sectors that can grow.
I hear you. But if I may, taking you back a bit on the issue of resource mobilization, of course, there are those who are doubting. Actually, two issues come up. One of them is the ability of URA to actually mobilize 14 trillion, because as you are aware, they actually failed to beat target for the concluding financial year. That is one. Then two, there is worry by the private sector, especially when it comes to domestic borrowing, which is normally the case when government fails to, mobilize enough resources through URA and other non-tax sources, and then of course knowing how the economy is doing at the moment. So what kind of confidence can you give the private sector, for starters, that they won't be crowded out of the
target
market, and then two, the confidence that actually URA will this time beat the target?
We are very confident because we start with URA, and the extra resources they needed to hit this target of 15 trillion to begin with. If there were no administrative loopholes in the system, would actually have raised this 15 billion this financial year. But because they lacked some of the resources needed to close those loopholes, they couldn't. That's why this year they had a target of 13 trillion. They were short by 377. Next financial year, we have provided them with an extra resource of 90 billion to buy scanners at borders and also have other loopholes. We have strengthened our laws to do with real estate.
So you're widening the tax base.
We are widening the tax base
and improving
at the same time improving the efficiency of our revenue and giving them resources to do that. So we are very optimistic that they will hit this target. And we are very cautious at the same time that we know that government going to the domestic market to borrow from there, you affect the interest rate. You actually bring it up to be praying. So that's why we're limiting it to 954. We'd probably have gone to 1 trillion and more, but we're limiting it for next financial to 954.
And you have no plans of changing your mind at some point?
No, I don't think we have, because the budget has already been read, and we are.
And
then we are going to Exim Bank to borrow for money for the oil roads. We are getting money from UK for the Kabul International Airport. So we have got to move on like this for the next 3 years until we start getting our resources. We expect that when we start getting oil, we'll be having access to 2.5 billion in one financial year, which is almost half our budget, and things will start to change.
Cissy, what is your input on that submission?
First and foremost, when the Honorable says that, one, I think the budget is very ambitious when you look at the amount of money that we think we are going to raise. And like you rightly said, if Uganda Revenue Authority failed to meet the target, how sure are we it's going to meet the target? Of course, when you look at the budget document, it tends to say that they're giving much more money to Uganda Revenue Authority to ensure compliance, which obviously is good. But even without giving them additional monies, let us assume that probably we're not given additional monies. They already, I can give an example that we know that when you go downtown, there are traders who have 2 books. There's the right book and the one that they'll show. I mean, there's some of those things that people actually already know. So, and there are certain things whereby you actually may not even need to give additional resources. How about actually already covering those existing loopholes? Because if it's a known secret that they already have there are already loopholes that actually any ordinary person knows about. Then when we talk about, he talks about the petroleum fund, which actually is good, but again, we've seen issues when it comes to management of oil revenues. And that is where the whole issue of public trust comes in as to whether the oil revenues will actually be used for the intended purpose. Because you see, the oil coming in, I think, is very good. Having this fund is very, very good. But as to whether this fund, because right now we've seen the whole issue of handshake and things like that, and how it came out and how people are very disappointed. So when you look at an ordinary person, I think the issues of trust as to whether these monies will be used rightly, I think for me it's one of the things that we need to think about. I agree when you talk again about putting in place policies, cameras, and things like that. But you see, we shall continue to put in place those cameras, those policies, as long as we do not enforce and implement. You can still have these cameras. Who's putting in place these CCTVs? They can easily be manipulated. So we need to appreciate the fact that, fine, much as you're going to inject or invest money into establishing some of these very good policies, what happens if they do not work? Because we've set a very good precedent, yes, because we've set a very good precedent of coming up with very good laws, coming up with very good policies, but the problem actually has always been enforcement and implementation. It's not that we don't have some of these policies. Of course, there may be particular gaps, just like in any economy or just like in any country. But even though some of those gaps are there, how do you ensure that you work within those existing gaps when you're trying to break them? For me, that is one of my challenges. Then, of course, the Honorable talked about the whole issue of infrastructure and connecting it to agriculture. You see, when you're looking at infrastructure and agriculture, look at agriculture. How much are we actually injecting into agriculture, even without looking at the roads? Because you may have a road in place, but what if I have a garden, but I have this road, but I don't have a market? Where am I going to sell my produce? So, and again, you may have all these very many good roads, which is fine, but what is the rate, the return on investment on those roads? The ideal would be, well, according to me, in my lay thinking, would be that I know there are particular roads that are very strategic. Mbale, the Dokolo road. What if you invested more in those roads? Look at the return of investment. The monies that come out on those roads plow back the same resources, probably to construct other roads. Because the challenge right now is that we're injecting money in particular sectors, and the levels of graft within that sector are still very high. So if you're talking of agriculture, let us look at agriculture in its entirety. Of course, we discussed with the Minister of that one of the things we're looking at is you're looking at irrigation. Irrigation is good, but we also know there's a whole issue of climate change. Is irrigation coming in to mitigate climate change? And if you're coming in, or if it's coming on board to mitigate climate change, then irrigation will not actually be the cutting edge. The issue is, how do you reclaim the swamps? We discussed briefly that as an organization we've done research on quite a number of land titles that are actually in forest reserves. Of course, good enough we hear that these titles are going to be cancelled. But the issue is, the more you continuously keep damaging the environment, even if you irrigate, because irrigation at one point, the water that you are relying on is also affected by the climate, by the environment. So we need to really look at some of these things, and you're putting money in irrigation, fine, but how about the bigger and the wider picture that is going to contribute to the fact that you have forests, which national forests, which are central forest reserves you're cutting down. We're talking of cancelling the illegal land titles, but even where the land titles have been cancelled, people are actually continuously cutting down these forests. The swamps are not yet reclaimed. So we need to look at the bigger picture and actually be able to connect it to the person that is down at the grassroots. All right,
sis, I hear you, and I think it in a way relates to Geoffrey, one of the discussions we kind of had, during the break. But before I bring in Dr. Ezra on the issue of debt, because it came out in the submission of Honorable Bahati. Let me bring you in, Geoffrey, quite briefly, because one of the issues you're raising, because if you could keenly follow what Cissy is submitting, you see an element of corruption, with titles in, swamps and the kind of thing. But there's something you said, you talked about the fact that of the 29 trillion shilling budget we're talking about 90% of it is, cash-based and that kind of thing. If you can shed more light on that and the context and the dangers in that, and what should be the ideal?
You see, we would like to engage government, us from the securities industry. Cash is extremely a dangerous method of financing anything. If you want to add value to cash, what we do is we securitize it. Let me use an example of some remittances which comes from outside, Ugandans living abroad. It comes purely by accident, because somebody out there has a relative in Uganda who needs some fees, or maybe is building a house here, and so on. Government can respond to that by issuing an instrument which pulls that money. Government uses it and pays a return to those people. And this is not something which is being done, which is not being done elsewhere. Remittances are very big in India. They are very big in Egypt for government. But they don't allow it, as we do, to come by accident. They actually lay a trap for it. Right? they convert it from direct cash into an instrument which the government trades on and the public can trade on. These are simple methods which are not theory. They are already being done elsewhere. Now, our small securities industries here can help government to achieve some of these milestones. You are dispensing money, for example, in the agricultural sector for extension. We have seen it. Okay? You are going to pay cash to individuals, experts, to provide extension services. That's where now Cissy's issue comes in. Cash can be abused thoroughly. Okay? You ran away from graduated tax, not because people were not willing to pay it, but it was being abused. In our neighborhood here in Rwanda, they have laid fiber optic cables almost to the doorsteps of homesteads. The moment that country achieves a situation where somebody gets out of his house and go and swipes in a doka, in a shop, to pay for something, the moment they do that, you'll find that the revenue authority of Rwanda will be able to take a small bit of money from that swipe. That's the kind of money Mr. Bahati should be looking for, indirect taxes, which will overwhelm this direct cash method, which is prone to abuse.
And maybe what I see from your submission, Geoffrey, is the fact that, you know, with that kind of system, you leave a trail, you know.
Yes.
But let me bring in Honorable Suruma at this point on the issue of, because we've had the submissions, especially on how the 29 trillion is going to be mobilized. We can see a bit of it is going to be through debt, both domestic and foreign or international borrowing. Our debt today is at 32 trillion shillings. Are we still in a safe zone from where you sit?
The issue of debt is a bit emotional. We've been in a situation when I was in the central bank in 1987, we had borrowed way above our heads and we could not pay our debts, and we had creditors sitting around in the central bank all day waiting to collect money we didn't have. And we don't want to go back to those days. We had debt forgiveness. Paris and multilateral agencies had forgiven us, and now we restored our situation. We don't want to go back to that. At the same time, we recognize that we don't have enough resources of our own from the revenue authority to be able to bring about the rate of economic growth that we think is desirable. And so some amount of borrowing is almost inevitable, in my opinion. I think what is important, 2 points. One, what Cissy has been talking about, the efficiency with which the money is being used. Are we getting value for money on the roads, on the infrastructure that we are creating? That's very important. And a big problem of being a developed country is not having the capacity, the manpower to follow this investment, for this money that we are borrowing and putting on Karuma Dam or putting on Isimba, to make sure that we are getting value for money on that infrastructure. And we need to do more to make sure that this money is being used properly. If it is used properly, and we have the energy, we have the electricity and the roads and so on, then I believe that what she was saying about a high return on that investment means that our economy will be bigger, we'll be able to pay back the debts, and also to grow as a country. So for me, I'm comfortable with the borrowing. I realize that domestic borrowing is beginning to put pressure on us in a number of ways, not only on private sector and the cost of money to private sector and squeezing them out, but also in terms of the total magnitude that has to be paid as interest by the government to the people who lend us that money. So I believe that, frankly speaking, we have an eye on the oil, and we believe that in time we'll have the capacity to pay back. I know there was a view that we should not spend the oil money before we get it.
Yes.
But obviously we wouldn't be spending looking towards the standard gauge railway and so on, unless we had some comfort that something is going to come that will enable us. And we don't want to sit still and say now we don't borrow because let's wait until we have cash. No. I think we have to move on.
We have to move on.
And we have to have some confidence. And Ugandans should have some confidence that our country must move on and will be able to repay this debt.
Honorable Bahati, you seem to be burning an eye.
Yes, I just wanted to respond to what Cissy said about the public trust, especially in the way the revenue resources are going to be utilized. Yeah, that worry was attended to a few years ago by Parliament. When we passed the Public Finance Management Act, we actually elaborated what this money would be used and how it will be used. That's why you see, for example, we cannot use this money of oil to finance wages, to finance recurrent activities. That's why, for example, the 125, which is equivalent to 33 million US, is going to go for infrastructure of oil. So we answered that question, and it is by law. There's no one who is going to tamper with the oil resource to apply them to any other activities. On the issue of public debt, this has been a concern, and I think the only exposure risk that we have had is what Suruma has said. The interest rate that we are paying on money that we borrow domestically, because most of the loans abroad are concessional, 0.something% for a long time, 40 years, but domestic debt 12%, 15%, and the interest was becoming a bit hectic. That's why we have said let's cap it, let's continuously reduce the level of our domestic debt. But most importantly, debt wouldn't be a big problem. The big problem is how do you
utilize the fund?
Utilize it. We have been having a challenge in utilizing this. We have seen some projects where people have gone to borrow, we have borrowed, when actually we don't have the designs and feasibility studies.
So they are unable to utilize
the borrowed fund. Counterpart funding.
Yes.
And we have said now moving forward, we have learned a lesson and we are correcting ourselves and will not repeat those mistakes. If we don't have counterpart funding, we will not go to borrow. If you don't have a plan and a feasibility study and the design of a project, we are sorry, we will not go out to borrow for you. So, and if you are not implementing these programs when you get the money and you are an accounting officer, you are going to be penalized for that, because it's pointless and actually bad that you can go and borrow money. It sits on the account when we are paying interest. Then there has been this monster of the public, the PPDA Act, where you've seen Karuma. It took almost 2.5 years, administrative reviews, what and what. Now we are saying we want to amend the law, and we are saying we are going to cap the period of procurement. 3 months, whatever you want to do with the procurement, whether you are procuring an aircraft or a dam, you must sort it out in 3 months. Reduce the level of administrative reviews. Instead of 3, have only 2 or 1. So by amending this law, which we are going to do now, the draft we have it, we are going to press through the process. We will be able now start moving in a high gear. That's where you see the minister saying in the speech that we're going to be ruthless in some of these things. That's actually what he meant.
So we expect the absorption.
We expect the absorption, we expect speed of execution, discipline of execution, and more efficiency as we serve the people of Uganda.
All right. Geoffrey, you wanted to submit to that. Briefly, we are nearing the end of this interface.
Yes, actually, I support very strongly the point that this economy can absorb much more debt. It can absorb much more debt.
You're a banker, Geoffrey, so...
Yes, it can. And our Achilles heel is the domestic savings situation. We are not mobilizing enough domestic savings when we can. The capacity of Ugandans to save is not reflected, for example, in our banking system. There's a common saying you hear, we don't have a savings culture. That's not true. That's not true. Ugandans save, but they save in different instruments. They save in cows, they save in land. Those are dead instruments which cannot be traded.
The cattle are alive.
Not in terms of trading.
Is the cattle an instrument?
It is. When you securitize cows, it becomes an instrument. Yeah? So, in all seriousness, government should take the matter of the Ugandan ability to save more seriously and not believe this fallacy of the $1 a day household. That's not true. It has been disproved already by the MTNs, by the telecom industry.
So what are you looking at exactly, Geoffrey? Are you looking at social security reform, for instance, in practical terms?
Absolutely. You see, there's been an overemphasis on FDI, foreign direct investment, when there's actually domestic direct investment. You are not... investment money, somebody's money goes to where it is wanted. When you have a marked preference for FDI, which you think is safe, is cheap, actually it is not cheap. This money which you say is in concession or what, by the time the central bank has finished converting it into Uganda shillings, it is now very expensive. There's no time to go into that. But we have proven it. We have traced $1 of IDA money, which is 0.75%. We have traced it from Washington to here. By the time it has been converted into Uganda shilling, when the central bank issues domestic debt as a part of that conversion process for mopping up, when it is mopping up the excess liquidity, it is now more expensive than that's 0.75%.
Well, that's an interesting debate, Geoffrey, and I think we need to get time and go into it because it is, for purpose of our viewers, because I think it's one of the areas that we need to look at some point. We will go into that, but your point is well taken. Yes, Cissy, I have to bring you in at this point. I know you've been keenly following a number of government programs, especially looking at the integrity of execution of some of these projects. Of course, when we borrow this money, we're supposed to pay this money at a certain point in time. In your view, do you see, because we are looking at the budget speech and what it really espoused, did you see that coming out, the management, public resources management and administration?
Well, I think it comes out generally. And of course, when you look at some of the strategies that the minister talked about that will be achieved, that will be followed through to ensure that this comes to pass, of course, they talk of public sector efficiency. Now, the challenge, of course, that comes in place when you're talking of public sector efficiency, you cannot achieve public sector efficiency if, one, you haven't allocated sufficient resources for monitoring and supervision. The same budget, of course, talks about having increased pay to people, to staff within the education sector. But the challenge that the same budget talks about is absenteeism. Now, what does it mean? That fine, you've increased people's salaries, but you're not monitoring. When you talk of public sector, again, efficiency, the Auditor General's report that was released, I think, last year, there's a report which actually talks of staffing levels still being very poor. Now, if the people who are supposed to enhance or ensure public sector efficiency are not in place, you're talking of public sector efficiency, you have drug stock out. So some of the things have been talked about actually in passing. But of course, the issue that comes out is punishing of accounting officers that will deliberately delay the process.
So you believe more needs to be done?
More needs to be done, and you see, even if more was not done, let us just enforce and implement that those particular laws and policies that you already have. You have the Public Finance, as discussed, we have the Public Finance Management Act. It talks of accounting officers who actually get qualified audit reports. They're not supposed to be appointed.
And they are not.
Oh, come on. Some of them have been brought back. But that's an argument.
All right, Cissy, thank you very much. I'm very sorry. It's been an interesting debate. Viewers and ladies and gentlemen, we have to end it here. We've run out of time. It's been a discussion about the 2017-2018 financial year budget. I've been your host, Charles Boji. But my producer tells me that we still have a bit of time on our hands because of the importance of the issues that we are discussing. So when we come back from this break, I think we'll pick it from there, Cissy, on the issue of capacity, capacitating or building capacity of the people that are supposed to monitor the project, and then of course building the structures that are needed to do that monitoring. Thank you very much. After this very short commercial break.
Get proper insurance cover today. In many places around the globe, people cross borders because of fear, oppression, and persecution. But in East Africa, we cross borders for the right reasons: business, careers and education, trade, and much more. No wonder we are one of the world's fastest growing regions, and the East African newspaper is championing the region's growth and integration. In East Africa, we know no borders to our potential. Connect to opportunity every week with the East African newspaper. The East African, understanding the region.
Welcome back, dear viewers. We're still on the spot and we're looking at the 2017-2018 financial year budget. Of course, we're looking at the major highlights and how they relate to you and basically service provision at the end of the day. Cissy, before we went for the break, we're still looking at, because we're talking about the resources, because budget is about allocation of resources. And of course, the key thing is where these resources are allocated, they should be put to proper use. And just briefly, as you wind up, because I know Honorable Bahati might want to weigh in on that as well. What kind of structures should be in place to actually ensure that these resources are well utilized? Briefly.
To me, the structure is already in place because government has put in place already those structures.
What is lacking?
What is lacking is the will to enforce and to implement the various laws. Because, if you look at the various perception indexes that have been done when it comes to corruption within the country, why do the corruption levels within Uganda continuously increase? So the structures are in place. The systems have been put in place. The laws have been put in place. The challenge has actually always been lack of enforcement or selective enforcement of some of these systems. But then also, when you look at some of the agencies that are supposed to fight graft, when you look at the amount of money that are at times given to them, some of them are incapacitated. They cannot actually do effectively investigations. So much as the structures are in place, some of them at times maybe the issues of finances that are going to hinder the performance or the achievement of the mandate of some of these agencies. Okay.
Maybe before I bring in Honorable Bahati, I want to introduce something which I want us to touch, because I know now all these budgets are supposed to be synced to the National Development Plan. And I'll begin with you, Dr. Suruma. This budget, is it, in your view, aligned to the National Development Plan too?
Yes, of course, to a certain extent. The alignment is not simple. The budget, the National Planning Authority makes 5-year and 20-year and 40-year projections where we would like to go. But the budget is a year-on-year process. And it's not possible that someone who is planning and projecting that this is where we want to be in 5, 10, 15 years' time will be exactly aligned to one who is looking at actual estimates of revenues and expenditures for 1 year. So the alignment is not simple. Perhaps over a 5-year period, we can look at the alignment and say overall we have achieved 60, 70, 80% alignment. But I think that maybe we oversimplify or exaggerate the budget and the planning. These are indications of what we want to do. You have a vision of where you want to go. You probably didn't have the foresight to know that there was going to be a drought because you are not God. So these things come in, then you have to adjust the whole process. There is a famous statement from President Eisenhower in America, who was the commander of the Allied forces. He said, in planning for battle, I've always found plans to be useless, but planning indispensable. You do plan, yes, you should plan, but don't expect that your plans will be to the letter. No, it's good to have an indication, a sense of where you want to go as a guideline, and a sense of direction of where you want to go. But to expect that your every move will be according to plan is not realistic, in my opinion.
I hear you. Honorable Bahati, in the preamble of the budget, you see a statement of which again rhymes with the Vision 2040 and the National Development Plan 2 aspiration of achieving middle income status by 2020. And here we're looking at per capita income of above $1,000. And 2020 is 3 years away.
Yes.
We're in 2017, mid. Do you believe that aspiration is possible, given what is happening?
We are still optimistic that we can achieve it, and I think it's possible. But just to make one point about planning.
Yes.
To a large extent, this budget is aligned to our National Development Plan.
Okay.
And I think to differ slightly from Dr. Suruma, it's possible to have a plan, and actually that plan can be implemented. If
100%.
If you have discipline of execution,
100%.
if you have the resources needed, you can achieve
but
that.
There is raising issues
now
on the
issue has been, it's right, we have a plan, Vision 2040. We have a National Development Plan, which is for 5 years. And when we're doing this, we also expected that sectors would have sector plans that link to the national plan. But what has happened, unfortunately, and that's the point the minister made today, that if you don't have the plan now, because they were supposed actually to have completed them. So out of the 18 sectors we have, only 7 have strategic plans. So we have been wondering, if you don't have a plan, what are you going to use this budget for? So we have said in this quarter, if you have not finalized, because some of them have been saying we are finalizing and all that. If you have not finalized, we are not going to release money to you without a strategic plan for your sector. It's good you can have a plan, and actually we provided for it in the National Planning Authority law. We also provided it in the budget, the Public Finance Management Act 2015, when we introduced what I call a breakthrough of a certificate of compliance, where every department, every organization now is mandated by law to comply to the National Development Plan. But people have not been strict about this. And this mismatch is what actually brings problems. You find you are budgeting for what you have not planned, you are implementing what you have not budgeted for, you are accounting for what you have not spent on.
So you agree with me?
So after that is the submission
this much. But the only difference that we have, that's possible, the only difference that we have is that I believe, honestly believe, that if you have a discipline of execution, you can actually implement the plan that you have set yourselves. Because the planning allows that along the way, if the assumptions that you had changed, then you can change your plan. But still that will remain a plan, even when you change midway according to the assumptions. So the issue is the discipline of execution. People getting serious, and we are getting really serious this financial year. If you are not implementing the plan, you'll have a problem. Now, 50%, above 50% at the national level complied with the National Development Plan, the budget that we're implementing now, 2016-17. But when you go to the sector level, almost 60% failed the test.
What is the problem?
Lack of capacity for planning. That's what we are now struggling with, to build capacity at the sector level, to have people that will plan for the sectors and have these plans linked with the national plan, and also linked with the strategic directives, for example, that were issued by His Excellency the President.
How are you dealing with the local government, especially these new units as well? Because I know capacity is a big problem.
Well, we are building capacity. The National Development Planning Authority has got now a mechanism. We are working out a mechanism to build capacity at the sector level, at local level, to ensure that we are consistent with our planning mechanism.
Geoffrey?
First of all, I'm a very strong believer in planning. The planning function is very essential. In my language, we say if a household can plan, why not government? So the planning function is crucial. Now, as far as the relationship between the budget and the
National Development
Plan, there's one key signal which is discordant. That is the interest rate regime. The regime of double-digit interest rate is not compliant with what the NDP mandates, what we want to achieve. You cannot achieve middle-income economic status with a double-digit, in fact, upper double-digit interest rate regime. So it is very, very important that government works with all stakeholders to review the interest rate regime so that it becomes compliant with what we want to achieve. A double-digit interest rate regime sends a signal of high risk. If your key rate, the key benchmark rate of the central bank, for example, is 14%, just an example, anybody looking at it from anywhere will say the central bank is not confident in this economy.
By setting the benchmark rates up there.
Yes. So it is very important that everything is predicated on the interest rate signal. What the point I'm trying to make here is that it is not necessary that this double-digit interest rate regime continues to subsist, because the country is not that risky. The economy is not that risky. Ugandans are the most strongest believers in their own economy. They're the biggest investors.
Geoffrey,
yeah?
Let's look at the reason why we are in that situation. Is it because the central bank wants it to be that way, or is it because of the banks, the commercial banks that are dominating this space? Is it, because of the perceived risk? What is the reason why we are where we are, and how do we get out of that situation of high interest rates?
Yeah, it is historical. Remember, this government came in a situation where the economy was more or less destroyed. So what you do as a government is you stabilize. When you are stabilizing, that regime presents high interest rates. But as you move into growth, away from just mere stability, when you are trying to to push the economy to higher growth rates, interest rates will experience downward pressure. But it appears that we have very strong forces who do not have confidence.
What are these forces, Geoffrey? If you may remove the gloves.
If you remove the gloves, it is the planning function, those in charge of the monetary and fiscal policies. They have, because they succeeded in stabilizing the economy within a regime of high interest rates. So now they don't want to take a risk to move away from that regime and
to test the new waters.
Yes,
in other words.
Yes, because moving from, by the way, moving away from a high interest regime means moving away from cash. Remember, Honorable Minister, you are mandated to manage our budget on a cash basis, which is wrong. It is absolutely wrong. Because you must leverage as a government. If me, as a head of a household, and you, as a head of a household, can leverage, why not?
The situation was much worse when we are not on a cash basis. That's why we went on a cash basis.
Yeah.
This situation was out of control.
At this point, I want to bring in Honorable.
Let me conclude this point quickly.
The reason why I want to bring in Honorable Suruma at that point is I know he has sat at the other side of.
Me too. I've sat in cabinet, by the way.
Yes.
Now, just a quick one. You see, no country does it. You don't want to be a standalone in the whole world, running your government on cash basis, running a budget on cash basis. All the countries which have succeeded, which have exited from a situation of underdevelopment, they have graduated out of it by moving away from cash. Get away from cash. I know it is interesting for our stakeholders because cash does not leave a trail. Move towards instruments. I think here, Cissy would support me.
Well, before I bring in Cissy, Honorable Suruma, what is your input on that submission by Geoffrey?
The history is a long one. When we came in 1986, and there was no economy to talk of, and you had inflation rates in excess of 300%. The precise situation was that the ministries, the bank minister would read a budget and allocate 300 billion to Honorable Bahati's sector and 200 to Cissy's, and that money wasn't there. But they would spend the money from the central bank. So the central bank was printing. Now, I'm sure that Dr. Obel is not saying that we should do that.
No.
That's why we got away from that situation where we were spending money that we didn't have to a situation where we spend money that we have. And we don't want to go to in discipline I hope I'm not misinterpreting him too much, but I want people to know the history of where we came from. We came from hell. We came from hell. And the president had put his foot down and say, no more of this. Stop it. No more spending money that you don't have. That's the discipline we've been on. You may not like everything that has happened, but the stabilization, at least your shilling still can buy a few things here and there. But at that time, you'd have lots of money that couldn't buy anything. So that's the history. Now, I don't understand all the economics of my brother Geoffrey, instruments and so on.
Securitization.
The economy can become more sophisticated. But let's also stay within the common sense that all of us can understand that we want to, as much as possible, spend money that we have in some form. Maybe it's not cash, but at least we have an asset in the consolidated account that's called so many 15 trillion shillings has been collected. We have it, we spend it. When we get into the habit of spending much more than we have, we may see the economy getting again out of control. So we have to balance.
That's a good one. There's another issue I wanted us to look at as well, because you know, in the midst of all this, because Geoffrey here was talking about the issue of saving as well, trying to, you know, in a way attach it to the planning function, but saving in particular. The previous budgets we've seen government, trying to come out strong on the issue of social security reform. And when you talk about the high interest rates, I think one of the areas that can give reproof to that is if you can allow some of this money, pension money, released to maybe the mainstream banking industry, for especially long-term lending, or in whatever form you want, or maybe government being able to access some of this money, because I know our pension sector is really quite liquid at the moment, and I know government is a good borrower. So, Honorable Minister, are you comfortable with first of all, what are your views about social security reform, and are you comfortable, if you're interested in it, with the pace at which we are moving in that direction? I know Honorable Suruma has reservations in that area.
Yes, there are people who have argued, I think the numbers are as well there,
yes,
that out of the 25 or so trillions that we have in the economy available for lending, only 7.5 trillion is available for long term. The rest is for short term, 1 year to 3 years. And that creates a big problem, because when you get this money, then you must pay it in a very short time, and naturally that will be expensive money.
Yes.
So where is the source of long-term capital? That is the issue. That when we moved this bill to reform the sector, was attempting to answer that we can have a regime that encourages national savings for long-term development. So the law was moved in the House, and we did not move at the speed that we wanted, because we had to bring every stakeholder along with us. NSSF, unions, and the consultations are still going on. Of course, it's very important that we move cautiously, especially if these reforms are going to affect negatively the existing National Social Security Fund. But a regime that encourages savings, national savings, mobilization of national savings for long-term capital is very, very important. And now that we have UBLA in place, and we have a few pension schemes, you can't imagine, like Parliament now, we have mobilized over 200 billion in a very short time. 200 billion. I'm sure that by the end of this time we'll have reached almost 500 billion. So if we had similar resources, I also don't believe that Ugandans don't have the culture of saving. But I think what we lack is a mechanism to mobilize them. To mobilize them. And this is something that we are discussing, still in consultation with the stakeholders. We hope that when we all agree, then we can have a regime that opens up and mobilizes more savings for long-term capital.
I get you.
Yes.
Dear viewers, we are discussing the 2017-2018 financial budget, and at this point we are going to take a very short commercial break, and when we come back, I'll be picking your calls and your submissions about about the discussion that we are having at the moment. So we'll take a very, very short commercial break and then come back to the calls. Welcome back, viewers. We are looking at the 2017-2018 financial budget, and I have a distinguished gentleman in the studio and a lady. Honorable Suruma, I'll start with you. Your final comment as we come to the end of this interface. And I need to add also that you can be part of this discussion with a very quick comment or question. But as you wind up, Honorable Suruma, with your comment.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this dialogue. I hope that people's expectations of government are realistic. We should recognize that government is only 20% of the total economy. The remaining 80% is in our hands as private citizens. So we shouldn't exaggerate and think that the government can do each and everything. It's not true. But the government sets the tone, it sets the policies, the environment in which we can act, the peace and law and order and infrastructure. And if the government does these things well, then it's up to us, the rest of the economy, to also participate and do our best.
I hear you. Cissy?
No, I think picking up from what the professor said, if government can play its role, especially on enforcement and implementation, if that doesn't happen, unfortunately, which is a fact, which is a given, that part of the monies that are going to be raised are obviously going to be stolen. So unless government does play its role, the challenge is part of this budget is going to be eaten up or stolen or embezzled, whatever it is. So government ought to play its role. Yeah.
Okay. David?
Yeah, just to reassure again Ugandans that we are on the path to shared prosperity, and we will continue to be committed towards that, and to achieve that we must have to industrialize our economy, and the whole purpose of this budget is really to fast track industrialization process of our country through production and productivity and adding value to what we produce, agriculture, to encourage direct foreign investments, fight corruption, and maintain peace and stability for all Ugandans. So the rumors that have been circulating sometimes in the media houses that the economy is not doing well, the economy is collapsing, is not true. We have got to continue assuring people that there are challenges, but the fundamentals of our economy remain stable and growing.
Maybe on that note, Honorable Minister, what is it that you're looking at that is likely to drive this economy, in the next financial year, from where it is at below 4% growth now? Yes, what are some of those areas that you look at and where, you're seeing green signals that are likely?
Well, I think we want to target the sector that employs the majority of Ugandans. That's the agriculture. By looking at production and productivity. And the minister really elaborated this. Create more jobs through industrialization, have more factories and adding value to what we produce. To a large extent, try to see whether we can have some sort of import substitution, especially taking advantage of our purchasing power. The things that we have been importing, can we produce them here? And yes, it is possible. Services. So those are some of the areas that we are looking at.
In fact, I'm interested in the services area, Honorable Minister. Sorry to dwell on that a bit, because the feeling is that this sector is dominated by, the big multinationals. We're seeing, of course, like Honorable Suruma rightly observed at the beginning, that yes, the service sector is now growing. You're seeing it eating into the agricultural sector's share, which is would ideally be a good signal that we're moving away from one form of production to a fairly advanced form of production. But we're seeing less participation of Ugandans in that space, if you to look at the share of revenue in that area.
Could I comment on that?
Please.
I think that services are much wider than the financial services. The tourism is technically a service sector.
Yes.
Transportation, the buses, the taxis, the vehicles, you're moving people around. This is a service sector. Restaurants, a service sector. Music and entertainment, and so on. Education, health, all these are service sectors. So, and these are clearly not dominated by foreigners.
No.
But the financial sector, yes, is dominated by foreigners. It's an important sector. We need to do more, in my opinion, to make sure there is more competition as a way of bringing interest rates down. But I thought I should really clarify
make that clear, that
the services are much bigger than
the finance sector. Yes. Okay, maybe I was just looking at the portion of how much the service, some of these sectors like telecom and finance sector, constitute what we call the service sector. Yes. But we have a caller on the line. You can make your comment quickly or question.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you. Who is this?
My name is Jeffrey. Can I contribute to the talk show?
Yes, Geoffrey. Please go ahead with your question or comment.
Yeah, I did appreciate the ministers, the honorables, and in the studio. I want to make really maybe the planners know that however much we're expecting to use the URA as one of the big funders of this budget, there is a big problem to do with the method through which we are collecting the money, because I'm a business person myself, and of late, if you look at the how business has been taking place in URA, I think you must have seen a slowdown in the months of May and April. So I think if we must get some revenue from URA, then we need to put a human face in the process of collecting these taxes. If this is done, this would be very great. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, he's talking about the human face. I don't know whether his concern is on the machines or
well, it's talking about the issues of efficiency of administration of revenue mobilization by URA. We have had a few. They are doing a wonderful job, but also we have had a few complaints which we are attending to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. I have another caller. Please give us your question or comment. Hello? We seem to have lost that caller. Yes. Well, I have another one. Your question or comment?
Hello, how are you?
Good. How are you? Who is this?
Godfrey calling from Mukono.
Godfrey from Mukono. Yes. Your question or comment?
I have heard from Bahati.
Yes, please. Go ahead. Hello? Well, we seem to have lost that call as well. Hello?
Yeah, is like the budget seems to be encouraging local foreign investment or foreign investment.
Sorry, can you speak a little louder? Hello? Sorry, we seem we couldn't hear his. Okay, I have another caller. Yes, your question or comment?
Yes, my name is Opeduru John. I'm calling from Bukedia. One the panelists are forgetting about the economy of Uganda is the question of export. There is more revenue for the economy to earn through export. We have forgotten about our traditional exports, cotton, coffee, and all this.
Yes.
And we are focusing only on getting money through URA, through taxes. We need to upscale our involvement, or the government needs to upscale its involvement in promoting export, and we shall get more money. Countries which export are the ones that are rich, which get more money from outside and buy things from outside and fund all the services for their people, not from revenue only. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. He's raising a very important issue.
I think that's an important point, and I know Dr. Suruma will make a comment over it. We have what we call the low-hanging fruits, coffee, and Dr. Suruma has been making some good progress on this. Tea and fisheries. Then those are some of the things that we are working on, and I know that Suruma, who has been leading our efforts on coffee, can make a contribution this year.
Maybe before he comes in, there's an observation again in the preamble of the budget about the fact that our exports have come down in the previous, in the concluding financial year. But Honorable Suruma, on that, the gentleman...
Not on coffee.
No, not on coffee.
Have gone up substantially, and government...
Not coffee.
Government is putting strong emphasis, as you heard, providing I think 53 billion shillings for seedlings.
Yes.
And the target of 20 million bags by 2020, and we are pushing very, very strongly, and we see a response in the public to increase coffee production. This is our biggest export, and if we are successful, it will probably be bringing in revenues comparable to those from oil, which will be good, because to rebalance our economy, we are not a commodity economy. So yes, the government is very much appreciates the importance of exports, but government does not tax exports.
No,
we stop
don't.
that.
So
it's not a source of revenue. It's not a direct source of revenue for government
Yes.
budget. But of course, when our people have more money and they can buy goods, which are taxed, then revenue will go up.
And to tie this with the direct foreign investments,
Yes.
we have got some good investors now who are going to be processing this coffee that we produce. For example, there is an investor who will be setting up a factory and is connecting to the markets in Europe and America to make sure that when it is this Suruma and the group produces, then it's processed in finished products before it is exported to other parts of the world.
I hear
so
you.
there are really going to be exciting years ahead of us, and I have no doubt that the best time for Uganda is ahead of us.
Is coming. Geoffrey, on that note, of course, it raises the issue of our trade deficit and the effort now being done. Of course, we know it stands at about what, 2.8 billion US dollars. Do you see the effort, because the coffee drive is really something you can see, government really doing something on those 20 million bags, but do you see the same effort being replicated in other areas to really try and plug that trade gap that we have?
I think effort is being made. Credit must be given where it is due. Effort is being made. What is undermining the effort is domestic resources, domestic savings, the price signal in the economy. People save and invest when they know they can get a good return. Government is very key. Government is very important in sending out the signal through the budget mechanism. Now, when the interest rate regime remains high, people are constrained to save and invest. For example, right now, the minister knows very well savings accounts in banks are bring negative return.
At the moment?
At the moment. It has been there for a long time, and that is a function of government policy. I invite the minister to look at it very, very seriously, to ask that question: why should somebody put his money in a bank, and then at the end of the year, there's a printout which shows deductions, and because the interest which is offered on a savings account is something like this 3 or 4%, something like that. That is not very interesting. Government can come in. The role of government in monetary policy signals is very, very important, as it is in fiscal. You ignore the interest rate signal at your own peril. It will undermine you. You'll have all the good ideas. It will undermine you, and it makes you fail when you should not fail. My take from all government efforts, government is actually, if you look at what the president has been saying, middle income economic status must be achieved within this period. I believe it can be achieved. Mathematically, actually, we can achieve it if oil comes out. A mathematical achievement is possible. 1,000.
But will not be shared.
Yes, it is possible. But also, the shared one, as Professor said, it is also possible within that period I told you about earlier on. We need 2 cycles or 5 years. That one is without oil. We can achieve middle income economic status in 2 cycles of 5 years with just 8% growth in GDP per annum, year on year.
As you raised that.
The minister asked, where will that growth come from? It will be pushed from the domestic economy if you address the interest rate regime. Because DDI is domestic direct investment. It is the counterparty of FDI. Yes. Now, when you do not address DDI, you are held ransom from FDI, which is of poor quality. Poor quality FDI is the one which comes in and goes out very quickly. The high quality FDI is the one which comes in and stays for a long time. But it will stay for a long time only if it finds its partner, DDI.
But Geoffrey,
right?
Geoffrey,
yeah.
let's look at the solutions.
Yes.
Because, I mean, you really rightly diagnosed the problem.
Yes.
What can we do in, a layman's language to really bring down, to cool the, the rate at which interests grow, or the interest rates, to put it plainly? Yeah,
okay. First of all, there should not be just one development bank in a country as big as this, in an economy as large as this. Secondly, if you look at the profile of interest rates charged by commercial banks,
yes,
they cannot explain about 5 or even 10 points. They cannot explain. They cannot explain. Now that is wrong. A minister should be able to say, you are charging 25%. Can you break it down? What risk are you covering? Break it down.
No, but does not allow.
But I think that
no, in other countries.
The law. I think what he's trying to drive at,
yes,
is really a minister government intervening in the regulation of interest rates, probably looking at capping them.
The central bank.
I'm not a fan of capping,
but which is, I think, what we are trying to do. One, as the president said, we're isolating sectors by sectors and trying to find a solution for them. And one of the sectors that we want to isolate is manufacturing and value addition. That's why we are capitalizing the Uganda Development Bank. We are trying to see through the reforms that we intend to do to mobilize more savings, create more pressure, have more liquidity in this economy, so that people can have where to run to. But to the extent of capping or now getting government intervene in the market, we have left it for the central bank, and we think per now it's not the right
okay. Geoffrey here has reservations about the central bank policy in that, because I mean it's more of non-intervention. It's a free market economic dispensation, so you let the banks be. But I hear you. I mean, I think the main issue here, if I'm to get him correctly, is to have, give people options. Because I mean, you go to the bank today, they tell you a certain rate, you have no choice. You don't have much choice, because you go to UDB, they don't have the money to give you. You still have to do whatever you have to do.
If I may come in quickly.
Yes.
You see, interest rate is about risk. You are pricing risk. Now, you have to ask the person who is charging, what risk are you charging for?
That's the intervention.
Now, the Bank of Uganda, the central bank, is the one who issues the, what do they call it, the base rate. Right?
The benchmark rate.
The benchmark rate. Then the commercial banks add on top. The professor knows this very well.
I think this is debate for another day, because it's
very complicated. Yes, but my submission here is that whatever we do, this is the fundamental.
It's fundamental.
It is the fundamental.
And that's why we tried to bring in inclusive financial institutions, savings and credit, cooperatives and microfinance. Unfortunately, the law for regulating them was delayed, and people lost confidence in them because they lost money. But the law has finally been passed. I hope that the confidence can come back, so that the whole population is a part of the financial sector. This is a very important step that we must take. These savings have to be put in an institution that is regulated, that is safe. Because people are not going to come from Kapchorwa to put money in the bank in his bank. They must have an institution nearby.
And
they have confidence.
And to add on, the law is now going to be implemented beginning with July. The authority was put in place. The regulations are ready, so we should be having the regulations not only for microfinance, but even money lenders in the country.
I think that will help, because I'm sure the reason why someone can go to a money lender and borrow at 40–50% per month is clearly the reason, because of lack of options and the like. And that sanitization of the process will help, will go a long way in helping. Dear viewers, we've come to the end of this interface. We've been looking at the 2017-2018 financial budget. Of course, as you notice, we've spent quite some good time on the area of financing, because we know it's a very, very important factor which, will oil the different economic activities to see us attain Vision 2040, which is, of course, You know, when you look at these financial year budgets, they're like building blocks, you know, towards achieving that, because they feed into the National Development Plan, which will again deliver us there. I've been your host, Charles Boji. We've been having Investment Bank, Geoffrey Onegi. Thank you for finding time to be with us this evening. We've had Honorable David Bahati, State Minister of Finance. Thank you for finding time.
Thank you.
Cissy Kagaba, anti-corruption activist. Thank you. And Dr. Ezra Suruma, former Finance Minister. Thank you very much for finding time to be on this show. Good evening, viewers. I've been your host, Charles Boji.